Woo!
Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show, produced by students for you. I'm Agnesa Sofovich, a sophomore studying journalism, and our guest today is the voice of the Gators, Sean Kelley, who has over 25 years of experience providing play-by-play for men's football and basketball games, as well as his own weekly podcast, radio show, and TV show. Wow. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Agnesa.
Thank you so much for being here today.
It is my honor. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's just get right into it. You earned your bachelor's degree in journalism at Southern Illinois University. Was sports broadcasting something you always knew you wanted to pursue?
Well, I think so. I mean, going back to high school, it was really kind of in my heart. And I grew up in a city of St. Louis where sports broadcasting was a very big deal. The Cardinals are the center of everything in that town. And their broadcasters are ambassadors of the team and the city itself. So I grew up in a home where the radio seemingly was always on, and I loved sports. And I also kind of knew that there would be at this point where I would no longer be able to play sports. My level of talent would not match the next level. And so I thought that would be a great way to stay involved. Now, I did go off to college, at the time Truman State University, or Northeast Missouri State University, which is now Truman State University. And I decided my first semester I was going to be a finance major. That wasn't going to go so well. So even after just one semester, I decided to finally follow my heart and then start to pursue sports broadcasting.
Yeah, I had a similar path, actually.
I just knew I would not be a happy person. And I think that's one of the secrets that I try to relay to young people is that I hope that you find something that you won't hate work, that each day when you get up, you'll be excited to go to work. And it wasn't going to be too long before either I wasn't going to be any good at finance or I was going to be miserable, or both. So I made the change.
You've said before that once you actually get into the game, it kind of takes care of itself. Like you kind of get into a natural flow state. Has that always been the case even early on in your career? Or just tell me a little bit about your first play-by-play experience.
I probably was scared to death about the experience, but it was women's basketball at Southern Illinois University. And I think that a lot of it was just getting on the air because there's no engineer, there's no producer, it's you and this equipment and you've got to find a way to make it work. So the first challenge was, let's make sure I get connected with the radio station. And then let's say the next challenge was to not knock myself off the air. After that, I started to learn kind of the craft of calling a game. And yes, I have said before that the game should take care of itself. You must be prepared going in, obviously. But at the end of the day, the game is the story, and the game will dictate what your broadcast is going to be like.
You worked as sports director at KFRU AM in Columbia, as well as broadcaster for the University of Missouri sports teams. How did you get those opportunities, and how well would you say that laid the foundation for your career?
I wouldn't say it was in any traditional way. I'd finished school at Southern Illinois University. I'd gotten married, and my wife at the time got a radio sales job in Columbia, Missouri. And we decided, well, if we can make both of the things work, her career and maybe there's something that I could take my next step in, that would be ideal. Now, what wasn't ideal is that they didn't really have a position. So they hired me at $12,000 a year to be a kind of a part-time sports person.
Okay.
And I gambled on myself. So my wife, thankfully, was very supportive and always has been. But I went there and the gamble paid off. I turned that into a full-time job. And because then I was the sports director at the flagship station of the Missouri Tiger Network, I got to do baseball. I got to do the studio for football and men's basketball eventually. And then I would fill in on those sports when Mike Kelley, no relation, who's the voice of the Tigers and still is to this day, if he had a conflict. So there's this part of your career where you just say, you don't ever say no. And so whether it was anything that Mizzou was asking or a high school play-by-play opportunity, I just said yes to everything I could. And that was a way to get my hands on as much as possible. Now, when you work at a small market station like that, you might have to do weather one day. You might have to do the news one day. You might have to do a lot of things. But when I look back on it now, it helped me become much more well-rounded than what I was trained for in the first place coming out of SIU.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same headspace where this semester is just like say yes to everything. Every opportunity, you never know what'll come of it. And it sounds like you landed a full-time position, so something great came out of it.
It did, and just like you're doing now, whether it's, you may not be hosting a show for the rest of your career,
Yeah.
but the research that you do to do an interview, or the ability to have a conversation and be comfortable on camera, that will translate to other things in your broadcast career. Or even if you decide broadcasting is no longer for you, these are skills that will help you in other ways in life.
You voiced play-by-play for the Missouri Tigers until transitioning to a similar role for Tulane University's Green Wave in 2002. Beyond the obvious relocation, what adjustments did you need to make to ensure a smooth transition between teams?
Yeah, the relocation wasn't as obvious because it was New Orleans. And I call it Planet New Orleans. It's uniquely its own city and culture. So as much as it was transitioning to a new team colors, all that, but that first year, Agnesa, on my off days, I would wash golf carts at the local country club to try and make ends meet. That same year, the Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans. And so at the end of my first year in New Orleans, they called and they said, we know that you want to do play-by-play, but would you come be our studio host on any days that you don't have Tulane responsibilities? So no more washing golf carts. But there would be a second job still, in that now I would be working the NBA schedule around my Tulane schedule.
In 2005, the NBA's New Orleans Pelicans hired you as their radio play-by-play announcer, which you then held for 14 straight seasons. How does calling a game for a professional team differ calling for college games, if it even is different?
It is. Let's just start with the sheer volume of games. So whether it's Major League Baseball, or in my case, the NBA, that's 82 games, and that doesn't include the preseason, and it doesn't include any postseason games. It's a lot. So while the load of college broadcasting is significant enough, the pro game has a greater volume of events. And at that time in the NBA, a lot of times it'd be on back-to-back nights. The travel was another thing to kind of get used to. Out of those 82, 41 of those are on the road. The game itself is played differently as well. So new set of rules, and the skill level is elite. The world's best play in that league.
When you kind of started doing professional teams, was that like kind of like a fake it till you make it for a little bit, you know, feeling a little bit like you don't belong?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And some of it had to do with my age. At the time that I got into the NBA, I want to say I was the second youngest among those 30 that I told you about. Thankfully, there were older guys in the league that were willing to kind of take me under their wing. I had coworkers with, at the time, the New Orleans Hornets, who were also really cool about kind of bringing in a young guy, and again, it's as much learning how to do the job as it is to manage the job. So it's one thing for you and I to talk about, hey, when you see this kind of a play on the floor, this is how you might handle it. The other aspect might be, though, hey, you've got 4 games in 5 nights coming up. You might want to be smart about how you pack, what you're eating, you're getting your sleep, all those things. So I had a lot of good advice early on, and so that kind of probably accelerated the adjustment a little bit.
While in New Orleans, you also served as a firefighter, talking about 2 jobs at once. What inspired you to get involved with the St. Tammany Parish Fire District, and was it, I'm assuming it was, but was it difficult balancing both jobs?
At times. I don't sit still very well. I've always kind of wanted to have some kind of a side hustle going on. The fire district next to the one that I lived in had a paid and volunteer component to it. So they had paid staff, and then they had volunteer firefighters at the time. And I'd always had kind of an interest in it. So I went ahead and inquired about it and signed up and did the initial training to become a volunteer firefighter. And sure enough, by the time all that was done that summer, the season was about to begin. The fire chief at the time came to me and he said, hey, look, there's this new online program through LSU to where you can do the academic side of the next part of firefighter training, and then we can do all the practical side, all the hands-on, the training, skill testing, all that here as your schedule allows. Sure enough, I would go on road trips and on the team plane or whatever, I would pull out my laptop and I would knock out different modules and chapters, and then I would come home from a road trip and we would do the training of the practical side of the whole course. And then we're nearing the end of the season, and I went and took the test, and the next thing you know, I became part of the paid staff. So what that meant was now I would be on a regular shift in the off season, and then during the season, I would give him my schedule at the start of each month, and then I was the flex guy. I would fill in for guys who were sick or injured or had vacation time coming up. So yes, I became probably the first and only, and probably never happen again, NBA broadcaster / firefighter.
In 2019, you landed a position with ESPN Radio as their lead play-by-play voice on college football. Did this require more objectivity from you since you're covering more than one team? And how challenging was that adjustment?
I just always felt like now I have the chance to be excited and root for whatever you want to call it for both teams, as opposed to it being kind of more slanted.
Right.
Once I kind of got that mindset, that was a good approach to have. The prep was a little different in that instead of being with one team every single day, and that prep kind of starts to take care of itself, now it's new prep each time for two different teams. So when I do an ESPN game, I do not care who wins or loses. At the end of the game, I can take my headphones off. Thanks, goodbye. When you're with a team, you're emotionally invested in that team. So if the game doesn't go well, if your team loses or a particular player gets hurt or something, now when you take those headphones off, there's a hangover. Now, hangover usually has this bad connotation, right? Hangover could be as much as, look, you just had an exhilarating game. And that high can continue, or it can be, we're all going to go back to the bus and head to the airport or whatever, and no one's talking and everybody's miserable and all that. So again, there's an emotional investment in there, but I see that as a positive. I like it.
Your career has taken you, as we've spoken about, to many incredible places, but it's ultimately led you here to the Swamp, joining the University Athletic Association in 2022. What influenced your decision to take this role here in Gainesville?
Yeah, this would be on that list of great places. It certainly is. It is a turn in my career that I did not see coming.
Okay.
As much as I've tried to map out everything in my life, which sometimes I do with success and others I don't, Gainesville, Florida was never on the radar list. So phone rang, and it was actually about, did I know anyone that might be interested in the job? Oh. And I thought of a couple people, and then I kind of thought, actually, I might be interested in the job. Yeah. Because, again, I was actually negotiating my next ESPN contract at the time. I was very happy at ESPN. I think at first, I tried to throw up a lot of roadblocks, and they kept knocking them down. And so finally, I was like, I have to really seriously consider this. And my agent at the time, he said, ESPN's wondering what the heck's going on? Why haven't you signed your deal? I thought we had the terms laid out. Thankfully, ESPN recognized the same thing I did about the brand of the Florida Gators. And they said, we will completely understand if you go take that job. If you do, would you stay with us in a smaller way? My wife and I, after 22 years in New Orleans, pack up and head to Gainesville. And it's been great. Kind of, our conversations kind of had this circle to it, right? It's been kind of great to circle back to being with a team again and wearing school colors and being invested in young people again.
There's always, as we said, so much excitement around game days here in the Swamp. I was just wondering, what has been like your favorite part so far?
There's nothing quite like a college football Saturday, or arriving at the arena for a basketball game, and as I pull into the lot, the line of students waiting to get in is down the sidewalk, around the corner, up to the intersection. The sound of a band. Here in the SEC, it feels that way in a lot of places. Uniquely each their own, but there's a buzz to it, and it kind of gets you kind of ready to go. Whether it's the Gator Chomp or the team running out of the south end zone tunnel, or the basketball team with their history. You can feel their history behind them. Lee Humphrey sits next to me for basketball, and he won 2 national championships here. And here he is, back in the same building where he made his way as a Gator. Shane Matthews and Tate Casey, who I work with on football, both former players from different eras with their own success. Jeff Cardozo, whom I work with on the baseball broadcast, he played here. And so I get to share that experience with them, even though I never went to school here, and I certainly never played in a Gator uniform. But that connection, that feeling, there is a communal aspect to this job. And it only happens when you're a part of something like here at Florida.
The energy, the family aspect, the once a Gator, always a Gator very much rings true, especially on those Saturdays.
Yes, and you think about the sheer power of this university. Just in the state of Florida alone, there's 3.2 million Gators fans.
I didn't even know that.
If you stacked up all the teams in Florida, pro and college, and we're talking about MLB, NBA in the state, NFL, the Florida Gators are the #1 team in the state with regard to its fan base and the financial power that comes with that. Let alone, as you're from New York City, there are now almost 500,000 living alumni in just the 50 states alone. And like you said, once a Gator, always a Gator. Kind of like in New York, once a Nick, always a Nick. The players feel the same thing as the students do. Those of us who get to be a Gator by extension, as in my case, you feel that way as well. And so that community is, I think, nourishing in a lot of ways. Not to mention professionally, it's huge.
As the voice of the Gators, you're not just calling plays, like we said, you're representing the university and community that you serve. Are there any guiding principles as to how you go about this? It's a huge role. I'm sure there's a lot of pressures, but how do you kind of navigate being a representative of the Florida Gators?
It'd be easy for me, Agnesa, to do my homework and game prep and go call a game, and that'd be it. But I think I would leave something on the table. I would think I'd be doing a disservice to that community that you and I just talked about, that if I just go do the games, great. But at the same time, if I can be an extension of that team or the university to its fan base, that's more of the vocational part of this job. And I take it very seriously because I know what this place means to so many people. And so, therefore, I want to, A, be their connection, but B, represent them and their university in a very positive and professional light, to use my job to perhaps make a difference in other ways. And so that brings me as much joy as calling the games, quite frankly.
I love that.
It really is great. There are some days I have to say, let's not wear anything Gator today. But those days are few and far between. But I'm ready the next day to put it right back on again.
That's awesome. So as sports fans, we obviously only see and hear part of your job, which is when you're on air. But I obviously imagine there's so much more happening behind the scenes. Can you take me a little bit through prepping into the off season? How do you prepare before a big new season begins?
You're right. It's kind of like you see the beautiful swan or duck on the water, and then you don't realize what's going on underneath. I over prepare, which at times is a fault, but I'll have anxiety if I don't prepare the same way I do for a high school game or an NBA or Major League Baseball game. So the work that goes into that is a lot of reading and building your notes and having your own system, but also having a lot of conversations, which could be with other broadcasters, coaches, players, attending practice. I still have to respect that break in the year. And whether it be traveling in a non-professional way in the summer, or just kind of trying to turn it off, it seemingly always turns ideas on. So those off seasons also may be a way to, hey, you've been doing this as long as you have. How do you freshen it up? Yeah. And you may be driving, whatever, and all of a sudden it'll hit you like, hey, maybe we should try this year. Or, I know you've put together your spotter boards the same way for 10 years, but maybe there's something new to try in that sense. And so that usually comes kind of in that season, if you will, that off season.
We were talking a little bit that you don't have much of an off season, but with like the rise of social media, I was just wondering how that's been kind of impacting how you prepare, even if it's not a lot.
In the timeline of when my career started, there wasn't social media. And now it's prominent, it's everywhere. The first thing I started to do was use it as a tool. Let's take X, or formerly Twitter. If you follow the right people, it almost becomes a bit of a newswire for you. So the ability to get a lot of information is there. Again, if you're trusting the right sources, if you're following the right people. Something about taking this job too is, and at the NBA level, you're almost asked now to participate on it, because as much as I want to say that I only need to worry about a show or calling the game on the air, part of my job is social media is an extension of that now. In fact, between the time that I took the job here at Florida and when I arrived, I remember I was riding in the car with my son, and at the time he was, 22-ish or so, somewhere around there. And I think I had this moment, you're talking about this off-season moment, it was early in that off-season, and I thought to myself, wow, I want to be the voice of the Gators. And I immediately knew everything that I wanted to do with the job, dating back to what I envisioned coming up in St. Louis through my experiences up until 2022. And it hit me with him sitting there that I not only have to do what I think the job is supposed to be, but how do I be the voice of the Gators for his generation too? Yeah. In that his generation, your generation, they're not consuming these broadcasts in the way that I did when I was coming up. And so whether it be through social media or the realization that they may only hear my radio calls on YouTube or on some social media post, or how do I connect with them because I know they're not sitting down gathering around the radio, or even gathering around a television set, because now all these games are in the palm of their hand, right? And so I not only had to say, okay, remember, Sean, there's a difference between a radio call and a TV call. Well, now there's also the difference between being the voice of the Gators as Mick Hubert knew it and now.
We talked a little bit about social media. I do want to jump back to that, but before I do, I did want to ask the question, how important is it for, an up-and-coming broadcaster to develop their own unique style, whether it's play-by-play, TV, how important would you say that is for their careers?
Being yourself. Yeah. I think that authenticity is still everything in this business. I won't make a third down conversion of the third quarter in week 4 sound like Game 7 of the World Series. That's just not who I am, right? That's not my style. But yet when you listen to a game, I think you can figure out pretty quick, I'm a Gator. It didn't happen right away. And I think that's the other thing for young broadcasters is whatever you decide you want it to be, or you're trying to settle in on, that's probably not going to be what it is in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. First of all, you're going to change as a person. But you're also going to figure out what you like and what makes you feel comfortable. And so style is something that is important, because I want you to be authentic in a broadcast. But it can't be forced, because people see right through it. Exactly. And again, you'll find out where you're comfortable with, what makes it sound right to you.
You can sense that authenticity right away from a broadcaster. That's the broadcasters I love the most, are the ones that are truly themselves. They don't conform to another broadcaster style or anything. I think that's really key in going far in your career, in my opinion, is just being yourself through and through, no matter what. And I think you articulated that beautifully.
And just for you to already know that yourself is a big deal. yeah, catchphrases aren't bad. They
No,
develop,
aren't.
they happen.
Yeah.
Mike Breen, you know, I don't want anybody to sit there and say, well, I really like listening to so-and-so, but Sean says, don't act or sound like him. I didn't say that. I think that's important that you identify who's really good at this and kind of try and follow their lead. That's probably the best way to do it. Follow their lead and then come up with your own way.
All right, Sean, one final question for you. As someone who wants to do tennis commentary, that's something I grew up playing and am very interested in. I'm just wondering, do you have one final vital piece of advice for aspiring sports journalists such as myself?
I don't know if I've got one. I love the fact that you already have a tennis background and you're passionate about it. That's big. And then there's the obvious, know the rules, study who the players are, all those things. I think whether it's, if you want to go into broadcasting with tennis or anything else, I think that if I could boil it down to one thing, if I only had to tell you one thing, I would advise you to be open to mentors. And you may have different mentors at different stages of your career, but I've been lucky enough to have mentors along the way. One that's been there the whole time, and then others that have been either where I want my career to go or where my career currently is. And I found that to be as important as anything else. So find that mentor. And it may not even be in the tennis world, but yet that mentorship can help you translate into tennis. But I think mentorship is a big deal, and it's on both ends of it, mentors and mentees. But I have found that whether it's the networking aspect, the advice on how to navigate the life of a broadcaster, or even just the tools of the trade, mentors are a big deal, and it will serve you well.
Sean, thank you so much for your insight today, not only into the world of sports journalism that not many people know about, but also for all your great advice, being so open about your journey. I truly learned a lot. We'll try and take that last advice and put it to good use. And thank you to our viewers for joining us. Until next time, good night.